Cześć! Do wypuszczenia druida w Path of Exile 2 coraz bliżej, bo będziemy mieć go już w piątek o 20. A do tego czasu oglądam w zasadzie wszystkie materiały, które pojawiają się na ten temat, a ten jest najciekawszym z nich, bo to materiał Ziggy'ego D, który miał okazję pojechać do Nowej Zelandii i pograć już druidem. A to, co teraz zobaczymy, to jego przygody w akcie pierwszym. Wygląda to naprawdę dobrze, ale zobaczcie sami.
G'day folks, Ziggy D here with a hands-on preview for the Druid. We'll take a look at the shapeshifting forms, Druid spells, and how the new class plays overall in the early campaign. I got a chance to record this when I went to the studio to host the Q&A, thanks to Grinding Gear Games for covering my flights to do so.
Dziękuję.
Keep in mind that as this...
Sorry, to pomyłkę już powiedziałem. On powiedział, że jakby dali mu lot do Nowej Zelandii, a ja myślałem, że on też jest z Nowej Zelandii. To ciekawe, skąd jest Ziggy D. Może gdzieś z Australii czy coś? W każdym razie jest od razu zaznaczone, że to jest gameplay nagrany tydzień przed releasem, czyli to nie jest najnowszy gameplay.
Was recorded more than a week from launch. It's non-final, and stuff can and already has changed from what you'll see here. The new Druid archetype is flavored by the combination of elemental and nature magic combined with shapeshifting into various beast forms. It does the rare and challenging action RPG task of giving us the potential to play a hybrid of spells and attacks. The human form is where your spellcasting happens, and your beast forms are where your melee happens.
Not natural, this. Air's gone sour.
When you start on the beach, this is brought home when you immediately find a staff with
A to ciekawe, właśnie, czyli nie zaczynamy gry na levelu 1 z talizmanem. W sumie to już jest taka rzecz, która wskazuje, że druid jest pierwszą klasą, która otwarcie mówi ci, hej, musisz korzystać z weapon swapa. Znaczy, no nie musisz, ale no raczej oczekiwane jest od ciebie, żebyś weapon swapował, nie? Skoro od razu dostajesz staffa, a dopiero później dostajesz taką swoją broń typowo klasową jak talizman. To w sumie strasznie ciekawe. Ciekawe, czy gra cię jakoś tutorializuje w tym używaniu dwóch różnych typów broni. Bo potencjalnie to może być klasa postaci o takim najwyższym skill floorze, nie? W sensie najmniej zrozumiała dla zupełnie nowego gracza. A dobra, zobaczmy dalej.
Lightning bolt to begin spellcasting. However, that is quickly followed by looting the new melee weapon type, a talisman. Talismans function just like any other melee weapon in terms of where your damage comes from. They scale just like a mace would, for example, with increased physical damage and attack speed. But unique to talismans, they give you the ability to select a shapeshift form using this UI element. Werewolf and bear form is what you have initially, with Wyvern unlocking a little bit later on. This choice doesn't lock you into a form, but rather it just grants you the basic attack of the chosen form. Whenever you use one of these talisman attacks or any other shapeshift ability, you'll automatically shapeshift into that form.
Fajnie, że to jest takie fluid.
The basic abilities of each form are fairly straightforward, with the potential for a little bit more complexity as you go and unlock other pieces that they can combo with. The Bear's Maul grants rage on hit, while the Werewolf's form, for example, creates exploding chunks of ice on attacking frozen enemies. So they're designed...
Rozumiem, że tu mówi o bezpośrednio autoataczku, że z autoataczku generujesz tam rage'a, tak? Powiedział o niedźwiedziu, czy już mi się pomyliło? A z jakieś ice chunki wilkiem. W ogóle z tym wilkiem to na swój sposób podoba mi się, że on taki mi się od razu kojarzy z Geonorem, przez to, że jest związany z lodem i on też ma coś takiego, też ma taki moonbeam, widziałem chyba w jednym z nagrań. Taki Geonor, tylko że bardziej wilkołaczy.
To support or reward the other shapeshift skills that you unlock later on.
Powinna być forma wilka Geonora.
Each of the three forms also comes with passive effects and mechanics. The version I played was likely non-final in this regard, but for example, Bear had defensive boosts and generated endurance charges when rage was consumed, while the Werewolf gets a sizable out-of-combat movement speed buff, which you can see in its movement as it drops to all fours. You also get your first actual
Out of combat movement boost, czyli wilkołakiem szybciej się poruszamy między paczkami mobów. To ciekawe. Ale też co pasywnie będziemy jako niedźwiedź generować endu charge, to też może być dobre.
Gem on the beach
Jeszcze
here,
nie bardzo
Volcano.
By primal will.
This is a spell that causes an explosion and spits fire projectiles for a long duration. There's a running theme with a lot of the Druid spells that they provide some sort of ongoing benefit and that they often synergize with things that you can do while shapeshifted. This is all to support that idea of hybrid spells and melee shapeshifting, because after all, if it was something a little bit more limited, like a fireball for example, then you have to make a clear decision between whether you use a fireball or one of the shapeshifted attacks. In this case, you can place spells, they'll continue to do stuff while you're shapeshifted. Perfect.
Musi przejść test Millera.
More
Czy
on
druid
Volcano
da radę go
later. For now
pokonać?
though, we can fight the Miller with volcanoes and follow up with lightning strikes from the staff if we choose, or with our chosen shapeshift forms melee, which is obviously what I go for.
Na pewno daje ci to więcej narzędzi już od samego początku niż jakakolwiek inna klasa, co trochę jakby wpisuje się w to, co powiedziałem, że największy to jest skill floor, no bo zaczynasz sobie powiedzmy rangerką, to co masz? Autoatak i lightning arrow. Zaczynasz druidem, masz stary talizman, którym wybierasz sobie formę, czyli masz tak na dobrą sprawę, no tutaj już kombinowanie, masz weapon swap, masz lightning storm, masz wulkan. Z tym wulkanem też jest jakaś synergia, chociaż pewnie, nie dobra, pewnie jej jeszcze nie możesz wykorzystać bez Stampida. No, brzmi jak najtrudniejsza klasa na start dla zupełnego nowicjusza. O, mówisz, że autoatak wilkołaka ma taki gap closer. Trochę jak niektóre skille na przykład mnicha, nie?
Still breathing. That's a start. Sleep now. Whatever's left of ye.
The first uncut gem expands your options with the Entangle spell, Lunar Assault for Wolf, and Furious Slam for Bear. I'll test all of them as we go, don't worry, but I decided to kick off with focusing on the Bear's Slam combination first.
Okay.
The Bear's basic attack Maul generates Rage on hit, and Furious
Czyli jest
Slam
gap
spends
closer.
Rage
Gap
to
closer,
empower...
czyli coś, co pozwala ci skrócić dystans między tobą i przeciwnikiem. Czyli, że używasz tego na przeciwniku, który jest w takim średnim dystansie od ciebie i twoja postać doskakuje.
Power itself with a more powerful explosion that leaves behind jagged ground.
Okej, takiego slamika wziął na start.
The fact that you're spending Rage also means that this constantly maintains endurance charges due to the Bear's passive bonus. Rage has been simplified across the game, with Rage spenders
Dobra,
now...
kolejne argumenty za tym, o czym cały czas mówię, że to zapowiada się najtrudniejsza klasa na start, bo najwięcej mechanik od samego początku wprowadza. Wygląda jakby od levela drugiego już miał do dyspozycji jeszcze Rage oraz Endurance Charge jako zasoby. No.
more consistently costing 10 Rage, and a new visual effect shows in your character to indicate that you have at least 10 Rage, making you glow, even in shapeshifted forms too. So this means that whenever you're glowing, you know that you can use a Rage spender. I find the Devourer first up, so we get the first test of our metal a little bit early.
Aye, this reeks of the Devourer's lair.
Boom.
And here we get to see a bit of the potential power of the Bear Styles combos.
Okej, komboska ma pokazać. Zrobił wulkan. Nabija Rage'a.
So volcanoes spit fire globs at an even pace, but slamming them causes an extra set of projectiles to fire. So placing volcanoes on bosses and bear slamming them while generating and spending rage is a simple and chunky feeling combo.
No, że
And it makes
slamowanie w
pretty
wulkan
short work of the
wprowadza
Devourer
więcej
here.
projectili w równanie. Dziękuję ci, Bergold, za 11 lat wsparcia.
You've gorged on the good folk of Clairfell long enough.
With the first support gem, I grabbed Fist of War to empower the Furious Slam, which plays very smoothly. It's a perfect pairing with this, as you naturally tend to space out the slams anyway as you move around or as you generate rage with Maul. So the double empowered slams that you get from Rage and Fist of War also very satisfying, so pretty happy with that as a first support gem choice for this playstyle.
No patrzcie, on ma od razu, kurde, dobrego talizmana, nie? Tam wcześniej drobnął sobie z Millera ten talizman na 2-5 fire i zaugmentował na niego plus 2 melee skills. To też na pewno
Pretty satisfying, so
trzeba wziąć
pretty
pod
happy with
uwagę
that
tego
as a first
damage'u.
support gem choice for this playstyle. There was some other interesting options there though, such as Overabundance and Burgeon for Volcano. So Overabundance lets you have a max of 2 volcanoes out instead of 1 at the cost of 50% less duration, which I think is a pretty good idea in many cases. Brings them down to something like 4 seconds maybe, but I think that's a very good trade-off because you can slam multiple of them down really fast, get a lot more burst on bosses, and have your slams triggering 2 volcanoes at once. So I run into my first of the League's Vile encounters around here.
Okay,
These
mechanika
are
ligowa.
just simple sacrifice
Zobaczymy ją w
platforms,
praktyce, to
basically
dobrze.
kill monster in circle.
Dobra,
Thankfully,
jestem
they
wdzięczny, że to powstało, bo chciałem zrobić jakiś taki poradnik wstępny do mechaniki ligowej i przyda się zobaczenie jej w praktyce.
aren't even too strict about you needing to be in the circle. You just kill monster from the circle. So this video is primarily about the Druid. I'm not really going to be focusing too much on the League mechanic
A, że
here,
nie
but I
będzie
will
się na
touch
niej
on my very
skupiał.
limited experience with it. The basic premise is kill monsters from 6 circles, and then you go raid a ruined temple for loot and a bunch of crafting options to improve your gear as you level. It's fairly unobtrusive as you play through, and then you get the chance to spend a little bit more time in the actual temple to do some gear crafting that felt pretty powerful. For now, though, I get a chance to pick up the Wolf skill, Lunar Assault, and the plant spell, Entangle, so I'll test those out in the near future.
Entangle daje jakiś buff,
Entangle
45%,
first,
zakładam,
it
że jest
places a
slow.
fissure that grabs nearby enemies to deal rapid small hits of physical spell damage while slowing the entangled foes. Skills like this are always really good for utility, like Oil Grenade, for example. Slowing enemies is really effective on Crossbow. I anticipate Entangle might feel similar here as a utility spell. And similar to Volcano, it's got that duration-lasting benefit design, so it kind of means that regardless of your actual leveling setup, your build, you can throw in some Entangles for some extra damage and slowing. I'm immediately
Mam
pretty
nadzieję,
impressed
że
with the
będą
feeling of...
grywalne takie buildy typowo pod Entangle, bo mi się strasznie podoba taki właśnie koncept. Ja mówiłem o tym pewnie z 10 razy, ale pnącza, grzybnie, w ogóle chciałbym... Ja tu bym widział w takim druidzie naprawdę taki koncept w stylu Zry trochę, nie? Że stawiasz jakieś takie sadzonki, ale że to nie są totemy, tylko takie trochę bardziej proaktywne.
Bear form for blasting bosses here, double empowered volcano slams is very rewarding. And the hybrid gameplay option on Druid means that if you need to kind of back off for a little while, you're taking a bit too much damage, your flasks are getting run down, you can give yourself some distance and throw down some volcanoes, entangles, and later on other spells while you're recovering. I'll take the opportunity before we test some wolf form here to comment on the overall feeling of shapeshifting, and it is, thankfully, seamless. GGG have done a really good job here of leveraging the weapon swap system, especially after they kind of changed it to not have delays and things like that. And they've done it in a way that requires zero thought on the player's behalf, which I think is really important. We've dumped a bunch of new players on the Druid here, and then you had to like teach them a bunch of complicated weapon swap mechanics and set up for the UI. It would be a real problem, but you don't actually have to think about it or do anything initially to use it in its simple form. So spells just naturally swap you to human form and your staff or wand so that you can use them, right? Because they don't necessarily work otherwise, and the shapeshift abilities need the talisman, so they automatically swap to that and thus swap you into your form. There's no real delays here, and it just feels smooth and seamless, even swapping between multiple forms. And the gameplay feels pretty fast too, because that was the thing from the preview that people were concerned about, especially in Warframe, it feels very fast.
Czyli on tutaj faktycznie, jest moment, w którym on korzysta i z normalnych czarów, i z wilkołaka, i z niedźwiedzia.
Gameplay feels pretty fast too, because that was the thing from the preview that people were concerned about, especially in Warframe. It feels very fast. The initial reveal, it did a good thing of like focusing on clear, low damage, low movement examples of mechanics so that you can understand.
Nie byłem pewien, czy nie będziesz musiał się zalokować na przykład w to, że jesteś albo na dwie formy, albo na przykład forma plus czary w formie człowieka. Wiecie, o co chodzi?
Was going on, but it didn't actually show what it kind of felt or looked like to play.
Ale okazuje się, że mamy więcej wolności.
It made it look honestly a bit slow and clunky.
So much blood spilled here the earth still bleeds.
The biggest thing that I noticed playing it though, that almost right away in Act 1, it was much faster and smoother than I would have thought from the footage, and that's because you're actually using things like dodge roll and sprint to reposition between attacks. And you obviously have a lot more damage than what they use in those previews. And now onto the Red Veil Zone, I decided to test the early game werewolf style a bit more. Lunar Assault is a large slash melee skill that has a very high freeze rate and cold conversion. And that can be paired
z
with the...
perspektywy widza, oglądając to mam wrażenie, że niedźwiedź wygląda bardziej ekscytująco, imponująco. Ale też z drugiej strony nie lubię grać zazwyczaj takimi klocowatymi ludkami, więc pewnie bardziej się bym skłaniał ku wilkowi właśnie.
Ice Bite support to give you a big bonus cold damage buff that's up pretty much all the time with this skill, as it freezes so easily on regular mobs and even fairly easily on most bosses. As a quick aside, I can confirm that you can be knocked down while sprinting in animal form, and I can confirm that it's just as hilarious as it normally is. Though this only happened like 2 or 3 times in the entirety of my playtime. I'm not sure if I'm just getting better at using it, or if the shapeshift forms are naturally more resistant to heavy stuns maybe. Either way, it only happened a few times. Anyway, the werewolf doesn't have any immediate synergy with the volcano stuff, but there's no reason to not just use them anyway. Like, you slap them down and then go into melee and tear them apart and you're getting the bonus damage, right? And it's all scaling kind of just as well as each other at this point.
Mówi, że na samym starcie
the early combination for wolf
synergii.
is using the shred attack on enemies frozen by Lunar Assault. Shred's that basic attack for the werewolf. It's a
Ninja.
rapid combination strike with the final hit in 5, I believe, hitting twice. Each hit from Shred on a frozen target chips off a chunk of ice, which then explodes after a decently long delay. The typical approach for rares and bosses is to use Lunar Assault a couple times, to freeze them, followed by 1 to 2 full combinations of Shred,
Dobra,
with
jak
the
to-
icicles exploding for
jak
some
to
pretty
dyma.
wild burst damage at times, especially on any sort of larger bosses. The icicles do fly backwards behind the target, but on bosses, most of them tend to hit, especially those bigger ones. There's a lot more you can do with the icicles later on, and more combo pieces for the wolf form.
No
It's
jest
only
super,
just this
wygląda
kind of basic
wizualnie.
bit here, but it feels
Zamrażanie
fast and
przeciwników i
satisfying, and
roztrzaskiwanie
the
w
freeze
PoE2.
potency is very
Dawno
high
tego
right
nie
off the
widziałem,
bat.
bo
So
wszyscy
it's a pretty
grali
good early game
lajki.
for the werewolf, I felt. Honestly, for the first half of Act 1, I would say both Werewolf and Bear felt like very valid approaches with support from the spells. I don't know that I would go pure spells unless you maybe worked in something from one of the other elemental trees as well. There's no reason you can't mix and match those if you're using a staff anyway. Volcano and Entangle are like fairly good on their own, but you want something else on top of that as like a burst skill. Obviously you can use the basic staff skills, those are okay, but you could use a third gem maybe to pick up a spell from the elemental tree to round it out with a bit more immediate damage if you're going for more of a pure spellcaster, for example. Since those pure druid skills are pitched at being kind of like ongoing effects that keep going as you're doing something else, so you want something else to do.
Spoko,
So
rata.
after Red Veil, the next tier of gems gives access to Shockwave Totem, Rolling Magma for the Wyvern form.
Aha,
It's
to
actually
ciekawe, patrzcie. Ten totem, Shockwave Totem, będzie tak jakby współdzielony. On się pokazywał do tej pory w Mace'ach, ale to jest jakby skill, który się będzie pokazywał tak jakby w obu drzewkach, jak rozumiem, i w Primal, i w Mace. Spoko. I mamy Rolling Magmę, to jest też ciekawe, bo myślałem, że Rolling Magma jest typowo Wyvernowym skillem, a wychodzi na to, że niekoniecznie.
Next tier of gems gives as you're doing something else, so you want something else to do. So after Red Veil, the next tier of gems gives access
Translator przetłumaczył staff skills jako umiejętności personelu. Zajebiste.
to Shockwave Totem, Rolling Magma for the Wyvern form, it's actually a Wyvern skill, and Pounce for Wolf, and Wing Blast for Wyvern as well. So Wyvern gets 2 here because
Okej,
it's kind of
czyli to są
first
rzeczy pod
introduced at this
Wyverny
point.
typowo.
You also like unlock the ability to swap to it on your talisman at this
Czyli
point,
już ma do
even if you've got
dyspozycji
the original talisman, I
Wyverny
believe.
potencjalnie.
I suspect maybe it's based on character level. That would make sense. So this expands your build options in quite a few ways, about 4 different directions right away. There's a lot of lines of play on the druid here, even right at the early game. So you can totem with bear form for jagged ground eruptions, for example. Rolling Magma plus Volcano as a combo there for fire-focused Wyvern. The Magmas trigger the volcanoes. You can incorporate Pounce into wolf form, which gives a bunch of benefits. And you can also grab Wing Blast for like a lightning-focused melee Wyvern with its default attack. Since at this point I was really enjoying the wolf form, I grabbed Pounce, and this is possibly the best all-rounded skill in the entire druid category.
Okej.
It's a skill of all time, I'll tell you.
Czyli mówi, że
Big
dobrego
fan. It's a great
lipslamka
movement
ma.
skill that
Pounce.
leaps gaps and obstacles, which is enough to use it just by itself, but it also slams and hits a large area of effect, which can be boosted with Fist of War. It marks a target on hit, and it automatically marks the highest
I
rarity target.
markuje od
so
razu
it just
przeciwnika.
works. You can
Dobra,
link
to brzmi
your own
dobrze.
mark later on, or you can
Movement
just
skill,
use the
który od razu
built-in
markuje.
Predator's Mark, which is honestly quite good on this skill.
Brzmi
It
gładko.
gives the target increased
Nie
damage
lubię
taken.
manualnego
Great.
markowania.
It's based on the number of enemies of your enemy that it has nearby, if that makes sense. So, okay, yeah, if you and your minions are standing next to it, it takes more damage. And it also summons a wolf companion
Dziękuję,
each
kurier, za rajdzika. Siema.
time you trigger the mark on kill. There's other ways to trigger it later on. So it provides its own minions to trigger Predator's Mark's effect anyway. So this skill does everything. Crazy. Obviously, it's a must-have in wolf form, but I used it in every single build I tested on Druid. I think if you're using a talisman in your build, you're probably going to want to use this skill. A leap initiator, mark on hit is really good for any melee playstyle, and it's good to just have unless you have like another movement skill that you really want to use instead. I can see using it. It's important here, I think, that I drive home just how you aren't locked to a form as well. Like, you may know that, but it's easy to just not really think about it. Your talisman choice is only the selection for which basic attack you have. It doesn't lock you into a form. You don't choose a form.
No
like
właśnie
most
to
games.
jest coś, czego na początku nie ogarniałem, nie? Że tam sobie wybierasz formę na tym talizmanie, tam masz taką przeklikajkę. I na początku myślałem, że to oznacza, że będziesz na przykład jak chciał korzystać z 2 form, to będziesz musiał na weaponswapie mieć inny talizman z wybraną inną formą. A tutaj ZiggyD mówi, że to nie, że to tak nie działa, że po prostu to, jaką formę wybierzesz na tym talizmanie, zmienia ci tylko basic attack, tak na dobrą sprawę, jaki posiadasz. Czyli na luzie możesz mieć talizman i staw przykładowo i mieć od razu dostęp do wszystkich form. kiedy ty będziesz przedstawiać nam gameplay postaci jako reprezentant Polski? Kurde, no, dobrze mówisz, kurier. Powinien mnie wysłać do Nowej Zelandii, żebym nagrał 20 minut gameplayu. W sumie rel. Jeszcze nie widziałem, Wiktorku.
Like this. It's only important what you choose on your talisman if you actually plan to do some sort of combo with it, and I don't think every build will necessarily use the basic attack. Some of them will because they have some pretty powerful combo effects. But for example, the bear forms one just generated rage, and there's other ways to do that. Rage support gem on another skill, for example, so I can absolutely see not using the bear's basic attack for too long. And you'd only use the werewolf one if you were planning on doing some sort of like icicle-based build, right? So you're absolutely free to leap in as a wolf and then proceed to bear slam everything, for example. And it took me a while to really fully take that in and incorporate that into my gameplay. I still catch myself thinking of each shapeshift form as this like own separate thing, even though I know it's not. But try and like remind yourself to take Druid a bit more holistically, right? It's if there's like a skill or passive bonus from one of the forms that you want to enable some combo or synergy with your build, then use it. Nothing stops you, right? The devs have given some guided and more obviously spelled out combos within each particular like shapeshift form.
Dobra, co tutaj masz na start? Generalnie, bo Ziggy D, jak ktoś trochę słucha jednym uchem, mówi o tym, że tak na dobrą sprawę gra, że łatwo jako człowiek trochę się zapatrzeć na to, że dobra, ja gram pod niedźwiedzia, podczas gdy tak naprawdę z tego, co mówi, przynajmniej na tym wczesnym etapie gry, gra premiuje i nagradza takie myślenie bardziej otwarte i kombinowanie z łączeniem różnych form. Chociaż, no, wyobrażam sobie, że pewnie w lejcie raczej skupiałbyś się na jakiejś konkretnej. Ale dobra. Co tu masz? Skill speed? Co ma sens? No bo skill speed to IK speed i attack speed w jednym.
Like
I AOE przede wszystkim tutaj na start.
Archetype. Like for example, bear's maul generating rage and then slam consuming it, right? Like these are pre-packaged items that we're given as obvious starting points, but there's plenty of room for cross synergies between forms and potentially even other weapon types too. Like I don't see why you couldn't like generate rage on a bear and then consume it in wyvern form for the big flame breath or something. Or even alternate between bear slams and human form mace slams. I'm sure there's a build there. So wolf form, which already felt really good with its high movement speed and attack speed, definitely got faster and more furious with pounce. Overall, this playstyle is a fairly straightforward melee attacker with some room for some pretty good skill expression, I think, in how well you position and freeze and then swap to shred enemies so that you kind of choose which direction the icicles fly off. I think if you are pretty good at it, you can perform, you know, get a little bit of extra juice out of it. But if you just want a lunar assault, freeze everything and just kill them with that, like a freeze cleave build, then you absolutely can.
Na mnichu czułem się zupełnie OP i wręcz absurdalnie na kampanii, po prostu zamrażając każdego bossa. I wydaje mi się, że tutaj może być coś podobnego. Po prostu podchodzisz do bossa i on spędza czas w bryłce lodu połowę czasu.
As high single target right away as the full bear form combo, unless you get like really nice shotgunning off the icicles on a large boss, for example. But freeze locks down many bosses, and I felt like I was just dismantling any bigger targets, you know. It's like by the time they go to do their first real attack, you freeze them, and then they're nearly dead. So, well, the fights were just kind of over before they began.
Jest Wyverna.
I did dip my toes into the wyvern form next to mess around with some of their skills a bit off and on. I played with rolling magma and volcano as a kind of ranged wyvern. Magma orb bounces also trigger volcano's projectile pulse. So it's pretty difficult, I think, to position and take full advantage of, especially if like the enemies are running at you, for example. Something like Entangle can slow enemies down to help with that, so you can throw down some Entangles and Volcanoes, and then shoot out some Magma Orbs to do some of that. But it's definitely a more difficult playstyle than what the other ones that I've covered so far offer you at this stage in the early
Rolling
game.
Magma, uwielbiony skill levelowania trakcie fajrowców po jeden.
It's a more complicated form with some very powerful specific elements, but less straightforward lines of play and synergies overall. It's also the one that's probably seeing the most changes from what I played to when it launches. I already know some changes that I'll mention as we go. I will come back to Wyvern a bit more later, because I had my first little temple foray after my 6th Vaal sacrifice here.
This place has gone to ruin.
Ta, Wyvernu można pluć na hejterów.
Blankets this altar.
So the League is introduced to you with a just very simple initial design. You place some basic rooms. It almost doesn't matter where you put these first ones. Later on, where you place them upgrades, but it highlights and makes it super easy to no-brain it if you want. And then you just run that small temple to clear the rooms you placed, leaving whenever you want. You don't have like a specific objective here. You can clear the rooms and you'll get like I believe a portal to send you out of there once you're done with all of the rooms.
Czyli stawiasz sobie na początku proste pytanie, możesz w każdej chwili wyjść, nic się nie lokuje.
And that is like a bunch of chests and weapon racks and things that drop gear, or a bunch of crafting benches.
Są benche craftingowe.
Let you Alk reroll a magic item, which is really good while leveling. Regal a magic item.
Takie bardzo proste, nie? Takie ekwiwalenty regalii, exaltów itd.
Just doing like 1 or 2 of these quick little temple forays each act will give you a pretty decent chunk of gear improvement. I think I did 1 per act. You get a really good amount of items to craft too, but I recommend hanging on to any like specific bases you want to upgrade as you go into one of these. So for example, your next weapon base that you need to craft, you know, you don't have to use crafting currency, you can just go into the temple and make it. Or maybe you like need movement speed boots.
Fajne wzmocnienie podczas kampanii.
Inventory to potentially craft movement speed.
Jak stagnujesz i chcesz się podbić trochę swoją moc.
I've never had so much like socketed and quality gear while leveling in Path of Exile 2 as I have with this temple.
Tu już ma wilki, patrzcie. Pewnie zaraz o nich wspomni, bo wcześniej nie miał, nie?
Temple gearing session, I quickly returned to the cemetery to absolutely embarrass Draven in wolf form, and then I do much the same on Lachlan too, which is often a decent.
Też miał wcześniej? Dobra, to musiałem jakoś przymknąć oko na to. To pewnie z tego marka. Pewnie odkąd Pounce odblokował, który markuje przeciwnika, nie? Ten mark chyba jest jakiś związany z przywołaniem wilków. Kurde, ale Lachlan został totalnie wydymany.
Hunting grounds. Best be careful shapeshifting, lest I take an arrow to the ass.
Arrow to the ass? Nie, to
the other set of Wyvern starter abilities is melee with Wing Blast and Wyvern's default attack Rend. So Wing Blast is a bit like Spear's disengage skill. It's a backwards leap that can get you out of harm's way and do some other utility things. But in this case, it also is a large AoE that stuns primed for stun enemies and triggers an extra explosion.
W sumie nic nie stoi na przeszkodzie, żebyś na przykład miał Pounce'a doskakującego, ale i tak grał Disengage, ten taki Wing Blast od Wyverny, żeby czasami sobie odskoczyć, nie? Chyba, że nie wiem, czy te czary nie mają jakby dodatkowego minimalnie cast time'u. Tam chyba w niektórych było, że masz na przykład plus 0,4 cast time, jeśli nie jesteś w danej formie.
For some nice kind of like AoE clear on those stunned enemies. It also generates charges on stunning enemies, power charges with a surpassing chance, it's called. You can scale it past 100% for more charges, potentially, for example. That's how that works. And one change that GGG has already told me about here with the Wyvern is that this skill has been buffed a bit by granting 3 charges now on stunning unique enemies, which is good, because I felt like it was difficult to actually use the power charge stuff in boss fights, but having 3 charges means you can get like 15 seconds.
Czyli pobustowali niektóre skille, że na przykład jeśli zestunujesz jakimś skillem unikat jakiegoś bossika, to zamiast jednego charge'a dostajesz 3, żebyś właśnie potem mógł wyprowadzić jakąś gigabombę.
Like chain it through the rest of the boss fight. So I could see you kind of just getting 1 stun and then that carrying you through the rest of the boss fight as you expend all of your charges. So that does sound like a nice improvement. So the Rend basic attacks can spend a power charge if you aren't currently buffed to give you a buff. With empowered lightning attacks, it gives that skill a much bigger AoE and adds lightning damage. And it does a few other things with a few other skills too. It actually turns it from like a very basic little melee attack into like a pretty hefty, big cleaving skill that does quite a lot of damage. Empowered Rend, it is slow, but it is big and chunky and really satisfying, and I'm really hoping that there's some potential for like melee Rend builds that maintain empowerment with that, because it felt really good when I was cleaving my way through packs with it. Wyvern's early game was definitely the hardest to get the hang of all of the kind of types here. At least when you try to stay purely in Wyvern form, because again, just like you can just use something like Wing Blast alone for a melee escapes skill and then like play your bear build, right? There's no reason you have to kind of like force yourself to stay in any one form if like overall it doesn't feel like it's paying off for you. Still kind of wrapping my head around that. I did also kind of take Wyvern through one of the most difficult areas in the early game here, but once I got through there, the first Spirit Gem gave me options of Savage Fury, which is basically a druid-like berserk buff that drains your health for a short boost to speed and damage. It looks very strong for bossing, and it's probably not too hard to manage that life loss as long as you got like a flask charge or something. Probably well worth it, and I expect we'll see some use. Anything that boosts your damage and speed for a duration.
Savage Fury. Że gdy rezerwujesz za 30 spiryta i w trakcie atakowania przeciwnika generujesz jakieś charge furii. możesz potem użyć tego skilla, żeby wejść w jakąś tam formę berserka, gdzie jesteś dużo silniejszy, dużo szybszy, poruszasz się też szybciej, ale drenuje ci trochę max HP na sekundę. A nie drenuje aż tak dużo. 3% max life'a na sekundę. To jesteś w stanie, kurde, łatwo sobie z tym poradzić. To brzmi bardzo silnie. Za 30 Spirita to brzmi super potężnie. Jako jeden z najlepszych Spirit gemów, zdecydowanie.
Usually a popular choice. I didn't get to chest it in this run though.
Taki lepszy Blood Rage, no.
Get hold of in the campaign.
Naprawdę.
And I instead went for Briar Patch. So
more
this buff
damage.
stores some melee physical
Increased.
damage that you deal to enemies to automatically place a thorny ground when you next cast a spell. So if you put a volcano down, it'll be surrounded by thorny ground, or if you cast like a lightning strike or something, it'll be thorny ground as well. It's got a built-in delay, but it's super easy to charge up with just like a single pounce on enemies, for example. It's pretty low impact overall, though I was thinking that there's probably some good utility supports that can go on there later, especially for plant druid styles.
Coś tu się przez chwilę
Between Thorny
glitchowało w
Ground,
filmie.
Volcano, Entangle, and Totem at this point, we have a lot of persistent effects we can dump out before engaging in melee, and they all scale fine together at this point in the game, right? Like, so there's no real reason to just not go ham and use everything. It's just like throw everything in the kitchen sink at the boss and then go in and bear slam them. You know, you got time often while most bosses are doing some sort of monologue to like pre-place like 4 Entangles, 2 Volcanoes, a Totem, and automatically place down the other Thorny Ground. So you're absolutely going to go that route. The other notable spirit gem choice that I passed up earlier was Herald of Ice, and I wasn't able to get my hands on one for the rest of the 3-act session, which is something I wanted to note because it's a bit of a shame because I played it and loved a lot of the wolf form, but I never really felt like I got the full picture of what it plays like to clear as an ice wolf. Because it feels pretty good, but it was missing a bit of AoE clear. That's the thing it probably struggled with the most. And not having Herald of Ice
Ty,
is like obviously the missing...
czekaj. Jak to wygląda? Pokaż, czekaj. Czy on tutaj przytrzymuje, żeby zastanowić się, gdzie chce postawić ten wulkan? Patrzcie, jak to dziwnie wygląda. Czekaj, bo zasłaniam trochę. Patrzcie.
And not having Herald of Ice was like obviously the missing piece of that puzzle.
No to śmieszne
so just keep that in mind as you watch that wolf gameplay in the future.
Jak stawienie budynku w
just mentally
RTS-ie.
add some of your own ice explosions to that gameplay.
wyglądało.
Just to kind of imagine how your werewolf leveling might go. It's already really satisfying, like doing the icicle explosions and freezing things and watching them shatter. I can only imagine with Herald of Ice how satisfying that's going to be. If I go wolf, I'll definitely grab Herald of Ice. For bear, I'd probably grab that Savage Fury. And Briar Patch if I level like a nature style druid maybe, I don't know. Activating it with Pounce maybe, I think that's more of a specific build thing. It's nice, but definitely not as impactful as other spirit gem choices.
Ale bomba na krowbelka.
Late Act 1, you start to get your first weapon set passives, and unlike leveling other characters, I think you really want to start taking advantage of these right away if you're going spells and shapeshift
Trochę
combat.
regeneracji.
Which I absolutely think you should, it's super fun. So it's pretty simple initially to
Małe te
start
notki
doing this.
damage'owe,
If
nie?
you've never
5%
messed with the
tylko.
weapon set trees, it only really gets confusing when you try to do respecking typically.
Operują na
That's when you
mniejszych
kind of gotta wrap
wartościach
your
niż
head
jedynce,
around just how it
zdecydowanie.
works. But initially you can basically just kind of like throw any duration or clearly spell-oriented clusters on the staff
Dobra, od
weapon
razu
set
powiem,
and any shapeshift or
że
survivability.
wygląda na to, że wypada rozumieć, jak działa weapon set jako nowy gracz, żeby poprawnie grać druidem, bo już od samego początku wypada, abyś na przykład, jeśli chcesz korzystać z jakiegoś wulkanu, z jakichś entanglów, żebyś sobie kurde zbustował na weapon swapie czas trwania tego wszystkiego.
But initially you can basically just kind of like throw any duration or clearly spell-oriented clusters on the staff weapon set and any shapeshift or survivability nodes or melee damage stuff on the talisman set. I spent and tinkered with these a lot as I went, and it felt like a pretty nice payoff for it. There's like quite a lot of it going on that you can cherry pick between in the druid area of the tree. It makes sense. I think passive tree support is like super important for this sort of like hybrid playstyle. And it's good that that kicks into gear pretty early on if you want it. For Executioner, I decided to revisit the Bear Slams since they performed pretty well early on. I was keen to see how they were holding up at this point. I had the Totem now to add in, and that triggers the Jagged Ground from the Empowered Slams to create another explosion for some more
Dodał
bonus
over
combo
abundance, żeby
damage.
móc stawiać więcej wulkanów niż jeden. Postawił dwa wulkany. Nie, tutaj w sumie wygląda jakby jeden postawił. Totemik. I mega bomba na egzekucjonierze. Szoka skądś miał. Zakładam, że może miał lightning damage gdzieś na itemach.
And yeah, their form is pretty amazing on bosses. And overall pretty well-rounded. It felt like the most well-rounded of them. Like powerful single
No pewnie
target,
jest to
decent
zulevelowany
AoE
lekko,
clear,
ale
maybe a
wyglądało
little
to
bit
bardzo
slower,
solidnie.
offset by just switching into wolf form. And nice defenses too. Yeah, it's pretty nice. And you know, you can just use that pounce to form shift into wolf and start sprinting when you move between packs. There's no reason why bear has to feel slow when you can instantly shapeshift into a wolf whenever you want. I was really vibing the hybrid wolf bear and human spells. It feels like you get to cherry pick the best parts of every part of these kind of three forms and just add them together to create a super build. Feels like cheating a little bit. Adding rage and rapid attacks to maul makes it really quick to generate rage for slams as well, with 3 mauls giving you enough for like 2 slams back to back. And when you start double and triple volcano slamming bosses...
Ale wygląda mniej klocowato od Warriora, nie? Mimo wszystko. Trochę się bałem, że będzie Warrior 2.0.
Poor Candlemass and indeed poor G.
Ale no wygląda
Guy
dużo
really got
bardziej
outclassed
gładko.
on this whole shapeshifting trope, even after selling his soul for it, right? So anyway, I don't know if you can hear in the background, but I have a newborn baby and our family is all sick right now. So I'll end part 1 of this preview here and optimistically hope to be able to get part 2 out before launch if I can. I'll try.
Zolodzy od tysięcy lat zadawali sobie pytanie, kto wygra, niedźwiedź czy wilk? I wychodzi na to, że w tym starcie wygrał niedźwiedź.
At times like this, I think it's best to just celebrate the small wins. Like, you know, making a part 1 preview and getting it published. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that helps a few of you see a bit more of the druids potentially, you know, the fun that has to offer you if you're a bit unsure based on that initial reveal. I feel like druids getting a little bit of a raw deal in the reactions.
Kurde, to jest tylko pierwszy akt, to jest pierwsze paręnaście leveli. I powiem wam, że te pierwsze paręnaście leveli tutaj wygląda bardzo dobrze, ale też potencjalnie nie wiem, czy to nie przytłoczy nowego gracza. To wygląda trochę jak taka klasa, która może sobie... Kurde, jeśli nowy gracz nie będzie chciał czytać, to może mieć problem. Ale może przesadzam, może też nie doceniam nowych graczy.
Maybe do my part just to give you a little bit more of a realistic impression as to what it looks like. Anyway, folks, that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D.
Ale wydaje mi się, że GGG powinno taki pokaz zrobić te parę dni temu, nie? W sensie, że to faktycznie wygląda dużo lepiej niż na tym pokazie od GGG parę dni temu. Wydaje mi się, że gdyby to pokazali, to dużo mniej osób by narzekało wtedy. Naprawdę fajniej tu wygląda. To bez pokazywania endgame'u, nic takiego.